Human bones, dozens of them, buried deep in the peat at the bottom of a shallow bog, wrapped in fabric and pinned to the mud with wooden stakes. But that was not the discovery that stunned archaeologists. When scientists began opening the skulls, they found something inside that should have vanished long before the pyramids of Egypt were even built. Brain tissue, 8,000 years old, still inside the skull, still intact enough to study, and in several cases, still containing DNA. The discovery happened in 1984 when construction workers draining a pond in Brevard County, Florida, uncovered a burial site no one knew existed. What they had stumbled into would turn an unremarkable Florida pond into one of the most extraordinary archaeological sites ever discovered in North America. The site is called Windover. It sits in the flatlands of east-central Florida, invisible from the surface, surrounded by suburban development that gives no hint of what lies beneath. But under the waterline, buried in layers of ancient peat that had been accumulating since the end of the last ice age, lay over 160 individuals. Men, women, and children, buried across a span of roughly 1,000 years. The oldest remains dated to approximately 8,000 years before present. This was not a single burial event. It was a community returning to the same place, generation after generation, to lay their dead to rest beneath the water. Nobody knew it was there, and nothing in the scientific literature had prepared researchers for what the bog had done to the people inside it. Here is what normally happens when a human body is left to decay. The soft tissues go first. Within days, the organs begin breaking down. The brain, which is roughly 80% water and fat, liquefies faster than almost anything else in the body. Within weeks, it is gone entirely. Within months, the muscles follow. What remains eventually is bone, and even bone degrades over as centuries and millennia, losing its collagen, its structure, its DNA. After 8,000 years, under normal conditions, you would expect fragments, dust, the faint chemical ghost of a person. Windover broke every part of that expectation. The preservation came down to chemistry. Peat bogs are among the most hostile environments on Earth for the microorganisms that drive decomposition. The water is cold, oxygen poor, and heavily acidic from thousands of years of sphagnum moss breakdown. That combination essentially pauses decay. It does not stop it entirely, but it slows it to a rate so dramatically reduced that organic material which would vanish in weeks under normal conditions can survive for millennia. The ancient Windover community had chosen, perhaps deliberately, a burial environment that would preserve their dead in ways they could never have imagined. When researchers from Florida State University began examining the skulls, they found the brain cavity filled with a dark, compressed mass of preserved tissue, not in one skull, not in a handful. In 91 of the individuals excavated, brain matter had survived in a condition that allowed meaningful scientific analysis. The team worked carefully, extracting tissue samples under controlled conditions, aware that what they were handling was irreplaceable and unlike anything previously recovered from the ancient Americas. What came next changed the field permanently. DNA, extracted from the Windover brain tissue, gave researchers direct genomic access to a population living in North America 8,000 years ago, not ancestry inferred from bone shape or isotope ratios. The actual genetic code of actual individuals, recovered from the most unlikely organ in the most unlikely place. The results placed the Windover people firmly within the lineage of ancient Native American populations, contributing critical early data to the ongoing scientific effort to understand when and how the Americas were first peopled. Their genetics showed no evidence of the later population movements that reshaped much of North America in subsequent millennia. They were, in genomic terms, extraordinarily early, a snapshot of the continent's first peoples frozen at a moment of remarkable antiquity. But the brains did not just yield DNA. The tissue preservation was detailed enough that researchers could examine evidence of diet, health, and neurological conditions in individuals dead for 80 centuries. Dietary analysis confirmed a mixed economy of hunting, fishing, and plant gathering consistent with the Florida wetland environment. Several individuals showed evidence of conditions, including spina bifida, preserved in soft tissue detail that skeletal analysis alone could never have revealed. Then there was the child. One young individual buried at the site showed signs of a serious brain condition that would have required sustained care from the surrounding community to survive as long as they did. 8,000 years ago, in a hunter-gatherer society with no medical infrastructure of any kind, that child was kept alive, fed, looked after, carried when they could not walk. Think about what that requires. In a community moving seasonally through a wetland environment, tracking game, gathering plants, managing the daily survival demands of a world with no margin for error, someone made a decision. This child stays. This child eats. This child is worth the cost. That is not instinct. That is a value system. And we only know it exists because a bog in Florida held the evidence for 80 centuries and gave it back intact. The child was not alone in telling a story. The bones alone could not. Across the Windover population, researchers found patterns that painted a picture of a community far more complex than the term hunter-gatherer typically suggests. Several adults showed healed injuries, fractures that had been set and recovered correctly, implying that medical knowledge of some kind was being actively applied. Others showed signs of chronic conditions that would have limited their physical contribution to the group, yet were clearly sustained across years of life. This was not a population where the weak were left behind. The evidence points consistently in the other direction. Windover was a community that looked after its own. The textiles reinforced that picture. Fabric woven from native Florida plants, some of the oldest cloth ever recovered anywhere in the Americas, was still wrapped around the bodies after 8,000 years. The weaving techniques were sophisticated, involving multiple distinct patterns that suggested a tradition of textile production passed down across generations. These were not people scrambling at the edge of survival. They were people with craft traditions, burial rituals, and enough social stability to return to the same cemetery for 1,000 years. The wooden stakes used to anchor the burials to the bog floor told the same story. Each body had been deliberately placed, intentionally weighted, carefully oriented. This was not disposal. This was ceremony. A community that had developed a specific and consistent way of honoring its dead, practiced across dozens of generations, invisible to the modern world until a drainage pump broke through the peat and changed everything. The site has since been recognized as one of the most significant archaeological discoveries in North American history, not because of the scale of the cemetery alone, though 160 burials from a single pre-agricultural community is remarkable in itself, but because of what the bog gave back. 91 brains sitting in the dark at the bottom of a Florida pond for 80 centuries, waiting for someone to ask the right questions. We tend to think of the ancient past as irretrievably lost, that what decay does to a body is final, that the further back we reach, the less we can know about the individuals who actually lived. Windover says otherwise. It says that under the right conditions, in the right environment, with the right chemistry holding everything in suspension, the past does not always let go. 8,000 years of silence, broken open by a construction crew with a drainage pump, and a pond that turned out to be something else entirely. When scientists opened those skulls, they expected empty bone. What they found was still thinking.